What if everything you thought you knew about Earth was only part of the story? For centuries we've walked across its surface, mapped its continents, and gazed at its skies, believing we've unlocked its secrets. Scientists tell us about plate tectonics, oceans and evolution, while history books describe civilizations rising and falling. But behind all of that lies a deeper, stranger truth. Earth is not just a planet, it's a riddle wrapped in fire, water, and time. From its violent birth in cosmic chaos to the hidden forces still reshaping it today, this world holds mysteries so vast that even with satellites above and submarines in the depths, we've barely scratched the surface. Think about it. This is a planet born from destruction, a molten sphere colliding with another world to create the moon. It's a planet that froze over entirely, where life was almost erased in ice, only to reignite in bursts of oxygen that poisoned nearly everything alive before paving the way for new forms to thrive. It's a place that has seen continents shatter and reunite, oceans rise and vanish, and species appear only to disappear in catastrophes that reset the clock of life again and again. And yet, through all of this chaos, one species, humanity, emerged, fragile but determined, building stories, monuments, and technologies that now stretch from the deepest seas to the edge of space. But here's the unsettling part. For all that we think we know, more than 80% of Earth's oceans remain unexplored. Entire ecosystems hide beneath forests and deserts. Ancient ruins hint at knowledge we can't explain. And the atmosphere above our heads holds phenomena so bizarre they blur the line between science and myth. Every answer we find only raises new questions, pulling us deeper into the mystery. So maybe Earth isn't the stable, familiar home we imagine. Maybe it's a living, breathing system, capable of both nurturing and erasing life without hesitation. And if that's true, the real question we have to ask isn't what Earth has already survived, it's what comes next. 4.5 billion years ago, before there were oceans to sail, mountains to climb, or forests to explore, there was only dust, rock, and chaos. The solar system was still young, a cosmic battlefield where worlds were not yet fully formed. Pieces of rock the size of mountains hurtled through space, colliding, shattering, and reforming in an endless cycle of destruction and creation. In this violent arena, Earth itself was born, not with a whisper, but with fire, shockwaves, and collisions that defy imagination. The ground we stand on today is the product of a cosmic accident, one so explosive it nearly destroyed the planet before it even began. Imagine the earliest Earth. It wasn't the calm blue marble we recognize today. It was a molten sphere, glowing red with heat. Its surface an ocean of lava, temperatures soared to thousands of degrees, and the atmosphere was nothing but poisonous gases, carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia, and nitrogen swirling in choking clouds. The ground bubbled and cracked, volcanoes spewed rivers of magma, and the entire surface was reshaped daily by impacts from asteroids. This was no home for life. It was an inferno, a planet still figuring out if it could even survive its own creation. And then came the event that changed everything, the giant impact. Somewhere in that early chaos, Earth collided with another world, a Mars-sized body scientists call Theia. The force of the collision was so staggering that it ripped part of Earth's crust into space. Molten rock and debris formed a fiery ring around the planet, glowing like a second sun. Over time, this debris coalesced, cooling and hardening until it formed the moon. That scar in the sky we look at every night is a permanent reminder of Earth's violent birth. Without that impact, the tides would never have existed as they do now, and life on Earth, if it had ever arisen at all, would have been utterly different. The moon became not just a companion but a stabilizer, locking Earth's tilt and giving it the predictable seasons that one day would help sustain complex life. But the violence didn't end there. For hundreds of millions of years after its birth, Earth endured a storm of bombardment known as the Late Heavy Bombardment. Asteroids and comets the size of cities slammed into the surface, leaving craters thousands of miles wide. Each impact unleashed energy greater than millions of nuclear bombs, vaporizing oceans and melting rock. To us, it would have looked like the end of the world, but in reality, it was the beginning. Those same comets and asteroids carried with them a precious cargo: water, carbon, and organic molecules. Every shattering collision seeded the planet with ingredients that in time would make life possible. The chaos that seemed like destruction was actually creation in disguise. Slowly Earth began to change. The oceans of fire cooled, solidifying into the first crust. Rain fell for the first time, condensing from the poisonous atmosphere. It poured for millions of years, filling low basins with water, carving the first valleys, and creating the first oceans. Steam rose into the skies, clouds darkened, and lightning struck endlessly across the planet, igniting chemical reactions in shallow pools. These were not gentle rains, they were part of the alchemy of creation, a process that would eventually give birth to life itself. Still, the young Earth was not a safe place. Volcanoes towered higher than any mountain we know today, erupting with unimaginable force. Entire continents of lava flowed across the surface, reshaping the land again and again. Toxic gases choked the air, creating storms of acid rain that dissolved rock and metal alike. Earth was alive, but alive in a way that felt more like a monster than a mother. And yet, in that harsh environment, something remarkable was happening. The conditions were brutal, but they were also dynamic, creating energy, mixing chemicals, and pushing the planet towards something new. The birth of Earth wasn't just violent, it was purposeful in its chaos. The same collisions that could have destroyed it ended up creating the foundation for life. Without the impact that formed the moon, the planet might have spun wildly, its climate too unstable for survival. Without the bombardments of icy comets, there might never have been oceans, and without the endless volcanic eruptions, the atmosphere would not have carried the gases needed to spark the first reactions of biology. Every disaster was, in truth, a gift in disguise. What makes this even more fascinating is how fragile it all was. At any point, Earth could have been shattered beyond repair. One collision too many, one imbalance in its orbit, and it would never have stabilized into the world we know. Even the creation of the moon was an accident, balanced on the edge of annihilation. Too large a collision, and Earth might have been destroyed. Too small, and there would have been no moon at all. The fact that the balance was struck just right suggests that our very existence is a rare outcome in the lottery of the cosmos. Today, scientists still search for exoplanets around other stars, looking for signs of worlds like ours. They found many rocky planets, some with atmospheres, some with water, but none exactly like Earth. None have the same combination of distance from their star, the same size and composition, the same stabilizing moon, and the same history of bombardments delivering the building blocks of life. Earth's violent birth wasn't just an origin story. It was a one-in-a-trillion event that created the conditions for everything that came after. And here's the mystery that lingers. We look up at the night sky and see the moon, glowing silently above us, but rarely do we think of it as part of Earth's shattered past. Every crater on its surface is a memory of that chaos, a frozen testimony to the battles fought in the early solar system. Our world, which seems so solid and permanent, is really a survivor, scarred but enduring, shaped by fire, ice, and collisions with ancient giants. Earth's birth was not the beginning of peace, but the start of a long struggle, a struggle to stabilize, to cool, to create oceans, and to make space for life. And yet, against all odds, it succeeded. The fiery chaos gave way to something miraculous. A world with the right mix of water, land, and atmosphere to become a cradle for life. The violent storms of creation set the stage for every story that would follow. But here's the most important part. This was only the first chapter. Earth's violent birth forged the world, but the real story of survival was still ahead. Because as soon as the planet calmed, new forces rose to test it again. Ice would come, fire would return, and entire ages would rise and fall. And what happened next would push Earth to its very limits, proving that survival was never guaranteed. It was Earth. After the chaos of Earth's birth began to calm, you might expect the planet to settle into something stable and predictable. But that was never the story of this world. If the first chapter of Earth's existence was written in fire, the second was carved in extremes, a relentless tug of war between fire and ice. Volcanic fury turned the skies black, oceans boiled, and continents split apart. Then, in shocking contrast, the entire planet froze solid, entombing everything in a deathly white silence. These cycles of destruction and renewal pushed Earth to its limits, setting the stage for the strange and fragile miracle of life. Picture Earth 3 billion years ago. The surface was no longer an endless sea of lava, but it was far from peaceful. Volcanoes towered like giants across the landscape, belching ash and fire into the sky. They didn't just create land, they destroyed it, reshaping continents again and again with rivers of molten rock. These eruptions pumped gases into the atmosphere: carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur dioxide. They warmed the planet, cooled it, poisoned it, and transformed it, all at once. Volcanoes were both destroyers and architects, leaving behind fertile soil and new minerals that would later become the foundation for complex chemistry. Yet even as fire raged, ice waited for its turn. Earth's early atmosphere was thin, fragile, and constantly shifting. Small changes in carbon dioxide levels could plunge the world into a frozen state, and when it did, the results were devastating. Scientists call these episodes snowball Earth, times when ice sheets extended from the poles to the equator. Imagine looking at Earth from space and seeing a giant pearl, shimmering white, the oceans locked beneath a shell of ice up to a kilometer thick. Entire continents were buried. Volcanoes still erupted beneath glaciers, but their heat barely made a difference. Life, fragile and new, was pushed to the brink of extinction. How could anything survive in such a world? That's the mystery. In the frozen silence of snowball Earth, life found hidden pockets of survival. Deep in the oceans, around hydrothermal vents, bacteria clung to heat and chemical energy. In tiny cracks in the ice, microscopic organisms endured, shielded from the worst of the cold. Against all odds, they survived, and survival wasn't enough. They adapted. By enduring the frozen ages, life became tougher, more resilient, and better prepared for the unpredictable future. But as much as ice dominated, fire always returned. Volcanoes didn't stop erupting during snowball Earth. They spewed carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for millions of years, but with the oceans frozen, that gas couldn't be absorbed. Slowly, the planet's greenhouse effect built up. The ice reflected sunlight, keeping Earth cold, but the atmosphere thickened, trapping more and more heat. And then, in a sudden and violent shift, the balance broke. Temperatures skyrocketed. Ice sheets melted in a geological instant, releasing floods that carved valleys and reshaped coastlines. Earth swung from frozen silence to boiling chaos, with temperatures climbing to extremes life had never seen before. These wild swings weren't rare, they were the rhythm of Earth's youth. Imagine what it would have been like to stand on Earth during one of these transitions. If you were on the surface during the icy ages, you would see nothing but a frozen wasteland stretching forever, winds howling across ice deserts, the air thin and bitter. Then, as volcanism overwhelmed the cold, you'd witness a world drowning in floods, storms so violent they tore landscapes apart, and an atmosphere thick with choking gases. To us, it would look like the apocalypse, but to Earth, it was simply change, another step in its endless cycle of destruction and renewal. These ages of fire and ice shaped more than just the landscape. They reshaped time itself. Every freeze pushed life to its limits, and every thaw opened new opportunities. When the ice melted, minerals that had been trapped beneath glaciers were released into the oceans, fueling explosions of growth for microscopic organisms. Algae and cyanobacteria thrived, pumping oxygen into the atmosphere. The oxygenation events that followed each cycle of ice and fire didn't just change the air, they rewrote the rules of survival. Organisms that couldn't tolerate oxygen vanished, while new forms of life began to rise. In a sense, Earth used destruction as a way to force evolution forward. And this is where the mystery deepens. Were these extreme cycles of fire and ice simply accidents of geology, or were they part of a larger system of balance? Some scientists suggest that Earth operates like a self-regulating organism, pushing itself to the edge, then pulling back just enough to allow survival. If the ice ages had lasted longer, life might have been completely erased. If the volcanic warming had gone further, Earth could have boiled itself into a Venus-like hellscape. Instead, every time the planet lurched toward catastrophe, it reset itself scarred, but alive. It's almost as if Earth was testing the limits of resilience, preparing for the story yet to come. These cycles also shaped the continents. As ice sheets grew and retreated, they scoured rock, grinding mountains down and reshaping valleys. As volcanoes erupted, they built new land, creating the first stable cretons, ancient cores of continents that still exist today. The interplay of fire and ice sculpted the blueprint of the continents we now recognize. Without those extremes, There might never have been stable land masses for civilizations to build upon billions of years later. The lesson of Earth's age of fire and ice is clear. Stability is an illusion. What seems like catastrophe from our perspective was, in truth, creation. The frozen Earth created the conditions for oxygen to rise. The boiling Earth tested life and rewarded resilience. The back and forth wasn't random chaos. It was a process, one that forced life to adapt, evolve, and eventually thrive. If Earth had been calm and gentle, perhaps life would have stagnated, never pushed to innovate. Instead, every extreme demanded change, and change is the fuel of evolution. And yet, even with all this destruction, Earth's story wasn't finished. The cycles of fire and ice prepared the planet for something even more dramatic. Oxygen would rise higher, mass extinctions would reset the clock again, and new rulers of the planet would emerge. What seemed like the end was only the prologue. The fire had forged the world, the ice had tested its resilience, and together they had prepared the stage for life's greatest transformation. If Earth's frozen ages pushed life to its limits, then the next chapter nearly destroyed it altogether. It wasn't an asteroid impact, a volcanic eruption, or a cosmic event that brought the planet to the edge of ruin. It was life itself. The rise of oxygen, something we now depend on with every breath, was once a deadly poison that nearly wiped the slate clean. Scientists call it the Great Oxidation Event, but perhaps a better name is the oxygen catastrophe, because for early life it was nothing less than the apocalypse. To understand how this happened, you have to imagine Earth more than 2.5 billion years ago. The atmosphere was completely different from the one we know. It was thick with methane and carbon dioxide, gases that trapped heat and gave the world a greenhouse climate. For the earliest life, simple microbes, this was paradise. They lived without oxygen, relying on chemical reactions with sulfur and methane to fuel themselves. The oceans were teeming with them, thriving in an environment that most modern organisms would find toxic. For hundreds of millions of years, this was the only version of life Earth knew, small, microscopic, but resilient. Then, quietly and without warning, a new kind of organism appeared, cyanobacteria. These tiny microbes had evolved a revolutionary way to survive. Instead of relying on methane or sulfur, they used sunlight. Through photosynthesis, they captured energy directly from the sun, splitting water molecules and releasing oxygen as waste. At first, the impact was small. Oxygen levels in the water rose gradually, binding with iron and forming bands of rust that settled on the ocean floor. These ancient iron formations, now turned to stone, are still visible in rocks today, silent witnesses to the catastrophe that was building. As cyanobacteria spread, oxygen levels grew. What had once been a trace gas soon became a rising tide. For us, oxygen is life, but for the anaerobic organisms that dominated Earth, it was poison. Oxygen is highly reactive, tearing apart delicate cellular structures and disrupting chemical reactions that primitive life depended on. Slowly, the world that had been a safe haven for anaerobic microbes became a hostile wasteland. Organisms that couldn't adapt were choked out, their habitats shrinking as oxygen spread through the oceans and atmosphere. The first global extinction in Earth's history wasn't caused by impact or ice. It was caused by life changing its own environment. The scale of the catastrophe is hard to overstate. Oxygen didn't just kill microbes, it transformed the planet itself. Methane, once abundant in the atmosphere, reacted with oxygen and disappeared. Methane had been one of Earth's strongest greenhouse gases, trapping heat and keeping the planet warm. Without it, the climate plunged into chaos. Temperatures dropped, and many scientists believe this triggered some of the most extreme snowball Earth events in history. Entire oceans froze, glaciers spread across continents, and life was cornered into isolated refuges once again. The very microbes that caused this crisis were also forced to cling to survival, even as their waste product filled the skies. And yet, out of this destruction came possibility. Oxygen may have been toxic for early life, but for those that adapted, it was a new superpower. Oxygen is incredibly efficient for producing energy, far more than methane or sulfur-based systems. Microbes that evolved to tolerate oxygen could generate more power, grow larger, and become more complex. In time, these oxygen-breathing organisms laid the foundation for all multicellular life. Every tree, every animal, every human walking the earth today is the descendant of life that survived the catastrophe and turned poison into opportunity. The oxygen catastrophe also changed the chemistry of the planet permanently. Those layers of rust formed on the seafloor became iron deposits, some of which humans mine today for steel. The skies, once thick with haze, cleared as methane vanished, letting in more sunlight. The oceans turned from greenish and murky to clearer, oxygen-rich waters that could support new ecosystems. The catastrophe wasn't just biological, it was geological, atmospheric and planetary. In a sense, Earth itself transformed into something new, a world where oxygen wasn't just present but dominant. But it's worth pausing to think about how fragile this turning point was. If cyanobacteria had never evolved, Earth might have remained a methane-rich world, warm but stagnant, populated only by simple microbes. No animals, no forests, no civilizations. If the oxygen levels had risen too quickly, life might have been wiped out entirely, leaving the planet barren. Instead, the balance tipped just enough to kill off much of the old life while allowing new forms to emerge. Catastrophe was also opportunity, and destruction became the foundation of evolution. There's also a deeper question here. How much of this was chance, and how much was inevitable? Was the rise of oxygen the product of blind accident? Or was Earth itself designed by its systems to push life toward complexity? Some scientists see it as a lucky accident, a twist of evolution that just happened to change the course of history. Others suggest it was part of Earth's self-regulating systems, a way of balancing its atmosphere to ensure stability. Either way, the consequences were monumental. The oxygen catastrophe is the reason we breathe today, the reason complex life could evolve, and the reason the planet looks the way it does. For the organisms that perished, it was the end of the world. For the survivors, it was the beginning of everything. The catastrophe forced life to become stronger, to innovate, to evolve new defenses and new ways of harnessing energy. It was the first great test of adaptability, a theme that would repeat over and over in Earth's history. Survival didn't belong to the strongest or the most numerous, it belonged to those that could adapt. And perhaps the most chilling lesson of all is how easily life can become its own enemy. The microbes that created oxygen didn't intend to poison their world. They were simply surviving, multiplying, doing what life does. In doing so, they unleashed forces that reshaped the entire planet. It's a reminder that life doesn't exist separate from Earth. It is part of Earth, capable of changing it in ways that ripple through billions of years. The oxygen catastrophe is proof that the line between creation and destruction is razor thin and sometimes indistinguishable. So the question becomes, if life could nearly destroy itself once, could it do so again? Today, humanity alters the atmosphere in ways just as profound, pumping carbon dioxide and other gases into the sky, warming the planet at a pace unmatched in history. Just as cyanobacteria reshaped their world without realizing the consequences, so too are we reshaping ours. The difference is that now, unlike those ancient microbes, we have the awareness to see what's happening. Whether we will act differently is a question history has left to us. The oxygen catastrophe wasn't the end of Earth's story. It was a turning point. It was the moment when life stopped being passive, shaped only by the environment, and began actively shaping the planet itself. From this point on, every major chapter in Earth's history would be a dialogue between life and planet, each influencing the other in ways that would decide the fate of everything living. And as history would soon prove, this was only the beginning of far greater trials. If the oxygen catastrophe was the first great extinction, it was far from the last. Earth's history is marked not just by the rise of life, but by its repeated destruction. Entire dynasties of creatures have ruled the planet, only to be erased in moments of geological time. Scientists call them the Big Five mass extinctions. But the truth is far stranger. Extinction isn't the exception in Earth's story. It's the rule. Again and again, Earth has wiped its canvas clean, only to paint a new picture of life with what remained. And each time, the survivors weren't the strongest or the most powerful. They were simply the ones that adapt. To understand the scale of mass extinction, imagine the Earth as a living museum. Each era a gallery filled with unique creatures and ecosystems. In one moment, the halls are crowded with trilobites crawling across the seafloor, giant amphibians lurking in swamps, or towering dinosaurs shaking the ground with every step. Then, suddenly, the lights go out. The hall's empty. 90% of the exhibits vanish, never to return. That's what a mass extinction looks like. an abrupt erasure of life on a planetary scale. One of the earliest mass extinctions struck about 450 million years ago, during the Ordovician period. At the time, most life was confined to the seas, thriving in shallow oceans teeming with diversity. Then came a brutal shift in climate, a global cooling event, possibly triggered by the formation of massive glaciers, caused sea levels to plummet. Habitats shrank, ecosystems collapsed, and nearly 85% of marine species disappeared. It was the first Great Purge, a reminder that even the most flourishing systems can collapse when the planet shifts beneath them. But it was nothing compared to what came later. About 250 million years ago, Earth experienced what scientists call the Great Dying, the Permian-Triassic extinction. This was no ordinary event. It was the most catastrophic die-off in history, wiping out more than 90% of all species. Oceans turned into toxic soups, land became barren, and forests collapsed. The causes are still debated. Massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia pumped carbon dioxide and methane into the air, triggering runaway global warming. Oceans lost oxygen, suffocating marine life. Acid rain burned landscapes, and perhaps even asteroid impacts piled onto the destruction. Whatever the cause, the result was apocalyptic. Imagine walking across a world where once vast forests were nothing but charred wastelands, where oceans reeked of decay, and where silence replaced the songs of animals. For millions of years, Earth was nearly lifeless, and yet from that near-total devastation, life clawed its way back, reshaping itself into new forms. Reptiles, once minor players, rose to dominance, paving the way for dinosaurs. The next act came at the end of the Triassic, about 200 million years ago. Volcanic activity linked to the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea filled the atmosphere with carbon dioxide. Rapid climate swings and ocean acidification triggered another collapse, wiping out nearly half of species. But once again, the catastrophe cleared space for new rulers. Dinosaurs, which had been small and relatively unimportant, suddenly flourished in the vacuum left by their fallen rivals. Extinction wasn't just an end, it was a handover of power. Then came the one most people know, the extinction that ended the reign of the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, an asteroid 6 miles wide slammed into what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The impact unleashed energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs, vaporizing everything nearby and sending shockwaves across the planet. Fires raged across continents, dust and soot darkened the skies, and sunlight disappeared for years. Temperatures plummeted, plants withered, and ecosystems collapsed. The mighty dinosaurs, which had ruled for over 150 million years, vanished in a geological heartbeat. Yet in the ruins of their empire, small mammals, creatures that had once lived in the shadows, emerged as the new survivors. Their adaptability, warm-blooded nature, and ability to hide and feed in desperate conditions allowed them to thrive where giants failed. From these survivors, our own story began. But even that wasn't the last. About 34 million years ago, another extinction struck, this one tied to dramatic climate shifts as Antarctica froze over and global temperatures dropped. And today, scientists warn that we may be living through a sixth mass extinction, this time driven not by asteroids or volcanism but by humanity itself. Species are disappearing at rates hundreds of times faster than natural background levels. Forests are vanishing, oceans are acidifying, and the climate is warming rapidly. If the warnings are right, we are not simply witnesses to mass extinction. We are its. What makes these extinctions so fascinating and so unsettling is the pattern they reveal. Each one was triggered by sudden change, volcanism, climate shifts, asteroid impacts, and each one cleared the slate for something new. Mass extinctions act like nature's reset button, destroying the dominant forms of life and opening niches for others. Without them, dinosaurs might never have risen, and mammals might never have had their chance. Extinction, as brutal as it seems, is part of the engine of evolution. But this also raises a haunting question. Why does Earth seem so merciless in erasing its own creations? Was it random chance that guided these catastrophes, or is it part of a deeper rhythm of planetary cycles? Some scientists suggest that Earth's systems naturally oscillate between stability and collapse, and that mass extinctions are inevitable when certain thresholds are crossed. Others argue that the universe itself plays a role, asteroids, supernovas, and cosmic radiation delivering destruction from beyond. Whatever the truth, The result is the same. Life is never guaranteed, and survival depends not on power, but on adaptability. Think about it. If Earth has wiped the slate clean 5 times before, what makes us believe it won't happen again? Today we build civilizations of steel, glass, and electricity, but all of it rests on a fragile balance of ecosystems and climate. A single asteroid, a runaway climate shift, or an unchecked collapse of biodiversity could unravel it all. History shows us that Earth doesn't hesitate to reset the board, and it doesn't play favorites. The trilobites ruled for millions of years longer than humans have existed, yet they are gone. The dinosaurs dominated every continent, yet their time ended in fire. Extinction is not just history, it is a possibility waiting in the wings. And yet, within that possibility lies hope. Every extinction in the past was also a beginning. From death came renewal, from loss came innovation, and from collapse came new ways of life. If humanity faces such a trial, the lesson of Earth's past is clear. Survival will not belong to the strongest empires, the tallest skyscrapers, or the largest armies. It will belong to those who adapt, who find opportunity in change, and who can endure long enough to see the dawn of the next age. Mass extinctions remind us that Earth's story is not linear. It is cyclical, filled with rises and falls, triumphs and tragedies. Life is resilient, but it is also fragile, and its survival depends on its ability to bend without breaking. The record carved into stone tells us that even in the face of catastrophe, Earth never truly dies. It reshapes, it renews, and it begins again. And the question for us, standing in the present, is whether we will be part of that renewal, or another chapter of loss. Life on Earth often feels eternal. We walk through forests, see oceans teeming with creatures, and imagine that this balance has always been here. But the truth is far darker. What we see today is only the latest version of life's story, a fragile chapter in a book that has been burned and rewritten many times before. Earth has not been a gentle caretaker. It has been brutal, merciless, and indifferent. Over billions of years, it has erased entire kingdoms of life in sudden catastrophic waves, leaving behind silence where there had once been unimaginable diversity. Scientists call them mass extinctions, but that phrase barely captures their horror. These were not gradual fades. They were brutal, devastating resets, where the overwhelming majority of life vanished almost overnight on the geological timescale. The first of these great calamities arrived about 450 million years ago, in the Ordovician period, when the seas were alive with trilobites, corals, and bizarre armored fish. Life thrived in shallow waters, weaving ecosystems that seemed unstoppable. Then came a sudden cooling. Glaciers spread, oceans drained, and the seas themselves turned against their inhabitants. More than 80% of species vanished. Imagine the seafloor, once crowded with creatures, reduced to a desert of shells and empty husks. It was a massacre carried out not by predators but by the planet itself, reshaping the stage of evolution with an icy hand. But that was only the beginning. Roughly 250 million years ago came an event so devastating that scientists simply call it the Great Dying. This was no ordinary extinction. It was annihilation. More than 90% of species were wiped out, both on land and in the oceans. Forests collapsed into ash, coral reefs disappeared, and entire evolutionary experiments were erased forever. The causes are still debated. Massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia spewed enough carbon dioxide and methane to choke the atmosphere. Oceans turned stagnant and suffocating, and acid rains scorched the land. Some suggest even asteroid impacts joined the assault. Whatever the triggers, the effect was the same. Earth nearly emptied itself of life. For millions of years afterward, recovery was agonizingly slow. It is said that the Earth itself became a barren wasteland, a graveyard where silence reigned. And yet, out of this nightmare, new forms emerged. Reptiles that could endure the chaos rose up, and from them, eventually the dinosaurs would inherit the planet. Extinctions are not accidents. They are turning points. The end of the Triassic, about 200 million years ago, showed this yet again. Massive volcanic eruptions split the supercontinent Pangaea, belching toxic gases that heated the climate and poisoned the seas. Nearly half of all species vanished, and in the space left behind, the dinosaurs took their crown. They flourished for over 150 million years, dominating the land, air, and sea, seemingly untouchable. But even they were not immune to the planet's ruthless cycle of erasure. 66 million years ago, an asteroid 6 miles wide slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula. The force was beyond comprehension. Billions of atomic bombs worth of energy unleashed in a single moment. Forests ignited, tsunamis surged, and a choking cloud of dust and ash smothered the skies. The dinosaurs, rulers of Earth for ages, were brought down not by weakness but by fate. Only birds, the small feathered descendants of their lineage, survived to tell their story, and in their absence, mammals once tiny and unimportant took their Without the asteroid, there might never have been us. Humanity owes its existence to extinction. Yet the cycle did not end there. Earth has continued to purge and rewrite. Climate swings, ice ages, and more subtle extinctions have shaped the planet again and again. And now scientists warn of a sixth mass extinction, this time unfolding before our very eyes. Unlike those before, this one is not caused by asteroids or volcanic fire, it is caused by us. Species vanish at hundreds of times the natural rate. Forests are felled, coral reefs bleach and crumble, and the atmosphere warms at a speed unseen in millions of years. The planet is once again reshaping its story, and we are not just characters in this tale, we are the catalyst. The unsettling pattern is clear. Extinction is not an exception, but a rule. Earth does not cling to life as if it were precious. It burns it down, resets the clock, and starts anew. Each mass extinction clears space for new players, often in ways no one could predict. Trilobites gave way to reptiles. Reptiles gave way to dinosaurs. Dinosaurs gave way to mammals. And mammals eventually gave way to us. The question is not whether extinction will happen again. It is when and who will survive to inherit the Earth. If history has taught us anything, it is that the survivors are rarely the most powerful. They are the most adaptable. Tiny shrew-like mammals endured where titanic dinosaurs fell. Hardy fish swam through oceans, poisoned by lack of oxygen. Life always finds a way, but not always in the forms we expect. That should terrify us and humble us, for while we build cities of steel and glass, we remain just as vulnerable to the whims of a planet that has erased stronger creatures before. Extinction is Earth's way of resetting its story, of clearing the canvas for a new masterpiece. But it is also a warning. If life can vanish in an instant, then everything we take for granted, our history, our civilizations, our species, exists only on borrowed time. We are not the first rulers of this planet, and unless we change, we will not be the last to be replaced. For most of human history, the night sky has been a source of wonder, a canvas filled with stars that inspired myths, religions, and dreams of destiny. Yet hidden within that beauty lies a truth far more dangerous. Space is not just a backdrop, it is a battlefield, and Earth is constantly under siege. Comets and asteroids race silently through the void, fragments of creation left over from the birth of the solar system. Most pass by harmlessly, never noticed, but some have crossed our path with catastrophic force, shaping Earth's story in ways more violent than any war or disaster we can imagine. The scars of these encounters are written across the surface of the planet, etched into craters that stretch for miles, reminders that no matter how powerful life becomes, it remains fragile under the shadow of the cosmos. The most famous of these events is the one that ended the reign of the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, an asteroid about 6 miles wide hurtled toward Earth at tens of thousands of miles per hour. In an instant, life's balance tilted. The asteroid struck the shallow seas near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, releasing energy greater than billions of nuclear bombs. The blast vaporized everything in its path, sending shockwaves around the world. Fires erupted across continents, and a cloud of dust and ash enveloped the atmosphere, plunging the planet into darkness. Plants withered, temperatures plummeted, and the once dominant dinosaurs fell, their empire shattered in the space of a geological heartbeat. But here's the twist. The extinction that brought an end to their rule also opened the door for mammals, and eventually for us. Without that impact, humanity might never have existed. We are, in many ways, the children of an asteroid. But the Cretaceous impact was not the first, nor will it be the last. Earth has endured countless collisions, some even larger, some far more ancient. 2 billion years ago, a massive asteroid struck what is now South Africa, leaving behind the Vredefort crater, the largest confirmed impact structure on Earth. It stretched nearly 200 miles across, a wound so deep it reshaped the geology of an entire continent. Over 1 billion years later, another enormous rock slammed into Canada, creating the Sudbury Basin, one of the richest mining regions in the world today. These impacts were not just destructive, they were transformative. They altered the planet's chemistry, redistributed minerals, and may have even influenced the course of evolution. Some scientists suggest that asteroid strikes delivered key ingredients for life itself, seeding Earth with amino acids and organic molecules from space. In other words, the same cosmic forces that bring death may also bring the spark of creation. The unsettling part is that Earth still lives under this constant threat. Every year, thousands of near-Earth objects are tracked by astronomers, their orbits monitored for signs of danger. Some are small, the size of buses or cars, and would burn up in the atmosphere, but others are miles wide, large enough to destroy cities, nations, or even civilizations. In 1908, a mere fragment, estimated to be about 200 feet wide, exploded over Siberia in what is known as the Tunguska event. It flattened nearly 800 square miles of forest in seconds. Had it hit a populated area, the devastation would have rivaled the most destructive weapons ever built by humans. In 2013, a much smaller meteor exploded over Chelyabinsk, Russia, injuring over 1,000 people with its shock wave, even though it never touched the ground. These are warnings, reminders that the cosmos does not need a planet-killing asteroid to remind us of our fragility. Even smaller rocks can cause devastation we are not prepared for. The terrifying truth is that humanity's timeline is tied to the randomness of space. At any moment, a rock larger than a mountain could be silently hurtling toward us, and we might not notice until it is too late. Astronomers call these objects city killers and planet killers, and while modern technology has improved our ability to detect them, our defense against them is almost non-existent. The best strategies we have are theoretical: nudging an asteroid's orbit with a spacecraft, blasting it with nuclear devices, or pulling it gently off course with gravity tractors. The recent DART mission, where NASA deliberately crashed a spacecraft into an asteroid to alter its path, proved that it might be possible to protect ourselves, but the margin for error is razor thin. If an asteroid were discovered only months before impact, there would be little anyone could do. The planet would simply brace for impact. And yet, there's another layer to this story that few talk about. Not all threats come from asteroids. Comets, with their long, unpredictable orbits, pose an even more dangerous problem. They come from the outer reaches of the solar system, often undetected until they are close, traveling at higher speeds than most asteroids. Their impacts would be catastrophic. Some researchers even speculate that periodic comet showers, triggered by the sun's motion through the galaxy, may be linked to cycles of mass extinction on Earth. If true, it means that life on this planet is caught in a cosmic rhythm of destruction, reset again and again by events beyond its control. But here's the chilling question: are we overdue for another one? Geological records suggest that catastrophic impacts occur every few tens of millions of years. The last planet killer struck 66 million years ago. The math alone is enough to make anyone uneasy. Humanity, for all its technology, has existed for only a blink of geological time. Our entire history, from the first cave paintings to the skyscrapers of modern cities, could vanish in an instant if fate decided it was time. All of our triumphs, all of our wars, all of our stories reduced to ash and fossils, just like the dinosaurs before us. And yet, even in this darkness, there is a strange kind of hope, because while impacts bring devastation, they also bring opportunity. Without the asteroid, dinosaurs would still rule. Without the chaos of cosmic collisions, mammals might have remained small, hiding in shadows forever. And without those long-forgotten strikes that delivered organic material to Earth, life itself might never have begun. The cosmos is merciless, yes, but it is also a creator. It destroys and rebuilds, wipes away the old to make room for the new. So we are left with a paradox. Humanity fears the sky, but it owes everything to it. The same heavens that could one day erase us are the reason we exist at all. Every shooting star you see is a reminder of this delicate balance, a symbol of both danger and possibility. And maybe that's the lesson we need to take, that survival is not about eliminating risk, but about preparing for it, understanding it, and adapting when the time comes. Because the Earth has faced killers from space before, and it will again. The only question that matters is whether humanity will be prepared, or whether we too will join the long list of rulers who believed they were eternal only to be silenced by a rock falling from the stars. When the asteroid struck 66 million years ago, it didn't just end an age, it began one. The dinosaurs, who had ruled the Earth with unmatched dominance for over 150 million years, vanished almost overnight, their colossal presence reduced to bones buried in stone. What followed was silence, an Earth stripped of its giants. Forests burned, skies darkened, and oceans struggled to recover. But within that silence, something unexpected stirred. In the shadow of devastation, the small, the overlooked, and the underestimated began to thrive. These survivors were not the towering reptiles or the armored beasts, but small, warm-blooded creatures with fur, sharp senses, and remarkable adaptability. They were mammals, and this was their moment. For millions of years before the asteroid, mammals had lived in the shadows, literally and figuratively. They were small, often nocturnal, feeding on insect seeds and whatever scraps they could find. Dinosaurs dominated every environment, leaving little room for competition. But the catastrophe changed everything. The very traits that once made mammals insignificant, small size, flexible diets, rapid reproduction became their greatest strengths in a broken world. While massive herbivores starved and predators collapsed without prey, mammals found niches eating insects, scavenging, and adapting to the planet's changing climate. In a cruel twist of fate, destruction became opportunity, and the age of mammals began. At first, their rise was gradual. The world they inherited was unstable, climate swinging violently, ecosystems rebuilding from scratch. But mammals proved resilient. Within a few million years, they diversified into forms the planet had never seen before. Some evolved into hoofed grazers that roamed grasslands, others became predators that stalked forests, and still others returned to the seas, becoming whales and dolphins. Evolution, spurred by the chaos of extinction, worked like a furnace, forging entirely new designs. Mammals spread across every continent, their variety exploding in ways even the dinosaurs had not matched. And from these countless forms, one lineage would eventually lead to us. The story of human beginnings is rooted in these early experiments. Among the many branches of mammals, one group stood out, the primates. They began as small tree-dwelling creatures, with grasping hands and sharp eyes adapted for navigating dense forests. Unlike the giants that thundered across plains or the beasts that swam in oceans, primates thrived in the complexity of trees. Their intelligence grew, their senses sharpened, and their reliance on social groups deepened. Every leap from branch to branch, every choice between food or danger, trained their brains for problem-solving. For tens of millions of years, they remained hidden in the treetops, a quiet lineage that would one day reshape the planet itself. About 7 million years ago, a dramatic change set the stage for the next chapter. Africa's climate shifted, transforming lush forests into sprawling savannas. For primates, this was a crisis, but also a turning point. Some stayed in the trees, clinging to the old ways. Others adapted, leaving the canopy to walk the open plains. They stood more upright, freed their hands to carry tools, and learned to survive in the unpredictable landscapes of grass and stone. These were the first hominins, our distant ancestors, taking tentative steps into a new way of life. The ability to walk upright was more than a physical adaptation. It was a gateway. It allowed for endurance hunting, for carrying food and young, for wielding stones as weapons. It was the seed of what would become human civilization. But intelligence was the real weapon. Early hominins had larger brains compared to other primates, and with each generation that advantage deepened. They crafted tools from stone, first simple flakes for cutting, then more complex designs for hunting and building. They controlled fire, unlocking warmth, protection, and the ability to cook food, which in turn fueled their growing brains. They began to communicate with increasing complexity, forming groups that relied on cooperation rather than brute strength. For the first time, survival was not just about claws or teeth. It was about knowledge, memory, and culture. By 2 million years ago, our ancestors had become true travelers of the earth. Species like Homo erectus spread out of Africa, journeying into Asia and Europe. They built shelters, hunted in groups, and mastered fire wherever they went. This was humanity's first great migration, and it revealed something crucial. Adaptability was our ultimate strength. While other animals lived and died bound to specific environments, humans learned to shape their surroundings. In deserts, forests, mountains, and plains, they carved out survival, and in doing so, they stepped into a role no other creature had held before, architects of their own destiny. The rise of Homo sapiens about 300,000 years ago accelerated this story. With even greater intelligence, more advanced tools and complex language, they created art, rituals and networks of shared knowledge. Cave paintings recorded their world, symbols carried meaning across generations, and myths bound groups together. They hunted massive beasts, crossed oceans, and spread across every continent. By the time mammoths roamed the Ice Age tundra, humans were already shaping ecosystems, driving extinctions, and changing the balance of life. In less than a blink of geological time, the species that had once been prey now stood as predator, thinker, and creator. But woven into this triumph is a reminder of where it all began, with survival in the shadows. Had the asteroid not struck, had the dinosaurs continued their reign, mammals might have remained small, insignificant footnotes in Earth's story. Humanity itself would never have existed. Our very presence is a consequence of destruction, an echo of catastrophe turned into opportunity. We are here not because life is fair, but because it is fragile, and in fragility there is room for change. And yet the same forces that gave us our chance still loom over us. Just as mammals rose from the ashes of one extinction, so too could another group rise if humanity were ever erased. The Earth does not play favorites. It offers opportunity, but it also demands adaptation. If there's one lesson to draw from the rise of mammals and the beginnings of our species, it's that survival is not guaranteed. It must be earned, again and again, in the face of change. The planet's history is filled with fallen rulers, each believing their dominance would last forever. The question for us is whether we will learn from their mistakes, or whether we too will be remembered as just another lineage that rose with promise, only to fall when the planet shifted once more. The story of mammals is, in many ways, the story of resilience. It's a reminder that greatness does not come from size or strength, but from adaptability, from the ability to bend without break. Humanity's beginnings are tied to this truth, and our future will depend on whether we can continue to live by it. Because the age of mammals is still unfolding, and its ending, like all chapters in Earth's story, is unwritten. When the first true humans emerged, they did so on a planet in the grip of ice. For millions of years, Earth had cycled between periods of warmth and cold, but about 2.6 million years ago, it entered a new era, the Pleistocene, better known as the Ice Age. It was not a single winter but a relentless rhythm of freezing and thawing, of glaciers advancing like slow armies across continents, and then retreating again. These frozen cycles defined the landscapes we see today, carving valleys, creating lakes and reshaping coastlines. But more importantly, they shaped humanity itself. The Ice Age was not just a backdrop to human history, it was the crucible in which we were forged. Imagine standing in that world. Vast sheets of ice, towered thousands of feet high, stretching across North America, Europe, and Asia. Mammoths with shaggy coats and curling tusks roamed the tundra. Saber-toothed cats lurked in the shadows, their fangs gleaming in the pale light. Herds of bison thundered across icy plains, while giant ground sloths clawed through frozen earth. It was a world both beautiful and brutal, a testing ground where survival meant constant adaptation, and into this arena stepped early humans, fragile in body but armed with something far more powerful than claws or teeth, the ability to think, to innovate, and to cooperate. At first, survival was desperate. Small groups huddled in caves, clothed in furs, using fire to hold back the cold. Stone tools were chipped and sharpened, used to hunt game or carve meat from bone. But as generations passed, humans learned not just to endure the ice, but to thrive in it. They became hunters who could take down animals many times their size, working together with strategies no predator had used before. They developed clothing, shelters, and weapons that gave them an edge in a world that seemed designed to erase them. The Ice Age pushed humanity to its limits, and in doing so, it unlocked their potential. The shifting climate also forced movement. When ice sheets advanced, they swallowed vast tracts of land, lowering sea levels and exposing new paths. Humans followed these routes, spreading further and further from their origins in Africa. They crossed into the Middle East, into Asia, and eventually into Europe. Each migration was not just a journey, but an experiment in survival, testing how far a species could stretch its adaptability. The cold forced them to innovate, to carry fire with them, to build shelters against winds that could freeze flesh in minutes. Where the environment was harshest, the need for cooperation was greatest. Family became tribe, tribe became community, and community became the foundation of culture. One of the most fascinating moments of this age was the meeting of species. For a long time, Homo sapiens were not alone. In Europe and Asia, Neanderthals thrived, stocky and powerful, perfectly adapted to the cold. In Asia, another species, the Denisovans, carved out their own existence. For thousands of years, these groups coexisted, sometimes competing, sometimes interbreeding, leaving traces of their DNA in us today. The Ice Age was not simply a story of one species conquering the Earth. It was a convergence, a mixing of lineages, until one emerged dominant. Why did Homo sapiens prevail? Some argue it was intelligence, others say language, or perhaps sheer luck. Whatever the reason, by the time the great glaciers began to retreat, our species was the one carrying the torch forward. The Ice Age also awakened something new in the human mind: imagination. Cave paintings dating back tens of thousands of years show mammoths, horses, and hunters etched into stone walls, lit by the flickering glow of fire. These were not mere decorations. They were symbols, stories, perhaps even the first whispers of religion. Music, too, was born, with bone flutes carved to produce haunting notes that echoed in caverns. Art and ritual gave humans a sense of identity, a way to bind groups together beyond survival. In a world of endless struggle, culture became a weapon, a means of endurance that no other species possessed. The environment was harsh, but it also gave gifts. When the ice retreated, fertile plains opened, rivers swelled, and new lands emerged. Humans followed, exploiting every opportunity. They hunted mammoths on the tundra, fished in glacial streams, and gathered plants wherever they could grow. The Ice Age forced them into versatility. Where some species could survive only in one environment, humans became masters of many. This flexibility was the key to their expansion. By 40,000 years ago, humans had spread across Europe and Asia. By 20,000 years ago, they had crossed land bridges into the Americas, chasing herds across frozen plains. Eventually they reached islands, using rafts or primitive boats to conquer even the seas. No other animal had achieved such reach. The Ice Age may have been cold and merciless, but it gave humanity the canvas on which to paint its destiny. Yet the Ice Age was not eternal. About 12,000 years ago, the planet began to warm. Glaciers receded, seas rose, and ecosystems transformed. Megafauna that had thrived in the cold, mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths, vanished in what scientists call the Quaternary extinction. Some blame climate change, others point to human hunting, and many suggest it was both. Whatever the cause, the world shifted, and humanity shifted with it. The retreat of the ice opened new possibilities. Instead of chasing herds across frozen plains, humans began to settle. They domesticated plants and animals, building the foundations of agriculture. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and the first sparks of civilization glowed where glaciers had once stood. The Ice Age shaped not only the land, but the spirit of humanity. It taught resilience, cooperation, and imagination. It forced us to face challenges that seemed insurmountable, and to overcome them, not with strength, but with innovation. It gave us art, culture, migration, and adaptation. Without it, we might never have become what we are today. But the Ice Age also carries a warning. The planet's climate has always shifted, and with each change, life has been forced to adapt or die. Humanity survived the last great freeze, but the future may bring new extremes, warming seas, rising storms, and climates more unstable than any we have faced. The lesson of the Ice Age is simple but profound. Survival belongs not to the strongest, but to those who change. When you look at the glaciers that still cling to mountains or the fossils of mammoths locked in permafrost, you are seeing echoes of that age, a reminder that we are children of ice. Our species was shaped by its cold breath, our cultures forged in its shadow, and our destiny forever tied to the rhythms of a planet that never stops shifting. The Ice Age is over, but its legacy lives on in every step we take, every tool we use, and every dream we chase. The Ice Age had forged humanity into survivors, wanderers, and innovators, but as the great sheets of ice withdrew, the world opened in ways no one could have predicted. Fertile valleys, rivers swelling with meltwater, and vast plains once locked beneath glaciers now bloomed with life. It was here, in the warming cradle of a shifting earth, that the next chapter of humanity began, the dawn of civilization. No longer would humans exist solely as hunters and gatherers, forever chasing herds across landscapes. Now, they would shape the land itself, bend nature to their will, and in doing so transform not just how they lived, but what they were. The leap from survival to civilization was one of the most dramatic turns in Earth's story, and it set the stage for everything that followed. It began quietly, almost invisibly. Along the banks of rivers like the Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Indus, small groups of people began to experiment with seeds. For countless generations, humans had gathered plants, testing roots, berries, and grains, but now they learned to plant deliberately, to tend and to harvest. What started as chance became knowledge, and knowledge became power. Agriculture was not just food, it was stability. It meant that instead of wandering endlessly in search of prey or edible plants, people could remain in one place. Villages formed around fields, and from villages grew towns. Humanity had tethered itself to the soil, and the soil rewarded them with abundance. With abundance came time. When food was secured, not everyone had to hunt or farm. Some could specialize in new skills, crafting tools, building homes, shaping clay into pots, or carving symbols into stone. Specialization fueled innovation, and innovation fueled progress. The world of simple survival gave way to complexity. Fire was no longer just for warmth or protection. It became a tool for smelting metals, for transforming the raw into the refined. Bronze and later iron changed the way humans fought, built, and expanded. The first cities rose from the dust, their walls reaching toward the sky, their temples proclaiming the power of gods imagined and revered. Humanity was no longer just surviving the world, it was remaking it. But this transformation was not without consequence. The birth of civilization also birthed hierarchy, inequality, and conflict. Those who controlled the land and the harvests gained power, and power became centralized in rulers, kings, and priests. Monumental architecture appeared, from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the pyramids of Egypt, each stone laid as a testament not only to human ambition but also to control over labor and resources. Writing systems emerged to record trade, law, and myth, carrying human thought across generations. The spoken word became permanent, and with it history itself was born. Before writing, humanity had stories. After writing, it had memory that outlived the teller. Civilization also deepened humanity's relationship with the natural world. Irrigation channels cut across deserts, turning arid landscapes into fertile farmland. Dams and canals bent rivers to human needs, while domesticated animals carried burdens, plowed fields, and provided milk and wool. The partnership between humans and other species intensified, weaving entire ecosystems into webs of dependency. Wheat, rice, and maize became staples, feeding growing populations and enabling cities that housed tens of thousands. Yet every step forward carried a price. Over-farming exhausted soils, irrigation salted the land, and deforestation scarred once lush regions. The seeds of progress were also seeds of fragility. As civilizations grew, so did contact between them. Trade routes connected distant lands, carrying goods, ideas, and diseases alike. From Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, from Egypt to China, human societies exchanged not only materials like obsidian, gold, or silk, but also technologies, beliefs, and cultural practices. Bronze tools spread across continents, while religious ideas about gods, spirits, and the afterlife found new homes in foreign lands. For the first time, humanity was not a scattered patchwork of isolated groups, but a network, connected by the flow of rivers, roads, and seas. And yet, beneath the rise of civilization, danger always lurked. As much as agriculture freed humanity from the desperation of hunting, it also created dependency. When harvests failed, famine struck. When rivers shifted, entire cities collapsed. Societies that seemed eternal crumbled in the face of droughts, floods, or invading armies. The ruins of once great cities like or Mohenjo-daro remind us that civilization, for all its strength, was never invincible. Just as Earth had wiped away species in mass extinctions, it could erase human societies with drought, disease, or disaster. Religion and myth rose in tandem with cities, offering answers to questions no one could fully explain. Why did the rivers flood? Why did the rains fail? Why did the sun rise and fall? Gods, spirits, and ancestors filled the void, shaping human culture and governance. Temples became centers of both faith and power, where rulers claimed divine right and priests interpreted the will of the heavens. This blend of belief and authority bound societies together, instilling order and meaning in a world that remained unpredictable and harsh. But it also created wars, conflicts fought not just over land or wealth, but over whose gods reigned supreme. Civilization was not simply about creation, it was also about conquest. Still, the march forward was unstoppable. Mathematics and astronomy developed alongside agriculture and writing. As humans measured time by the stars, planned harvests by the moon, and charted the movement of the heavens, laws codified behavior, carving into stone the rules of societies. Philosophy asked questions about existence, morality, and truth. Art and literature blossomed, preserving epics of heroes and gods, tragedies of war, and celebrations of love. Humanity was no longer only biological, it had become cultural, with layers of complexity that set it apart from every other creature on Earth. Yet this transformation also carried a deep irony. Civilization, which had lifted humanity beyond survival, also shackled it. Farmers worked harder than many hunter-gatherers had, tied to fields and harvest cycles. Disease spread in crowded cities, killing thousands at a time. Inequality grew sharper, with elites enjoying luxury while peasants labored endlessly. War became larger, deadlier, fought not by individuals but by armies wielding weapons of metal and strategy. Humanity's triumph was double-edged. Progress brought prosperity, but also suffering on a scale unknown before. And still, civilization spread. From the Fertile Crescent to the Mediterranean, from the Nile to the Yellow River, from the Americas to sub-Saharan Africa, the pattern repeated. Agriculture, cities, rulers, writing, trade, belief, collapse, rebirth. Earth itself seemed to encourage this cycle, offering fertile lands and then testing them with catastrophe. Civilizations rose like waves, each cresting with power and innovation, each eventually breaking and falling back into the sea of time. What makes the dawn of civilization so captivating is not just the monuments, the inventions, or the first written words, but the recognition of a new force, humanity's ability to alter the planet itself. For the first time, humans were not simply adapting to the environment, they were reshaping it. They cleared forests for fields, diverted rivers, and built structures that would outlast generations. In doing so, they began the slow process of transforming Earth into something it had never been before, a human world. But even in this triumph, one truth remains constant. Just as the rise of mammals depended on the fall of dinosaurs, the rise of civilization was built on both creation and destruction. Each breakthrough carried costs, each empire eventually collapsed, and each age of progress gave way to new struggles. Humanity had stepped into a role no species had ever held, but it had also stepped into a cycle that echoed the planet's deeper rhythms: growth, change, and renewal. The dawn of civilization was not the end of humanity's story. It was the beginning of a new and far more complex one. It proved that humans could create worlds within the world, systems of power, belief, and culture that would echo for millennia. But it also proved that no matter how high we build, we remain tied to the earth, dependent on its rhythms, and vulnerable to its shifts. Civilization gave us history, art, science, and empire. It gave us the tools to shape the planet, and yet it also gave us the responsibility to understand that every action leaves a mark, and every mark changes the story. Every great civilization has believed in its prime that it would last forever. The gleaming pyramids of Egypt, the vast palaces of Mesopotamia, the carefully planned streets of the Indus Valley, and the mighty walls of China all carried the same unspoken message: permanence. And yet, history tells a different story. Time and again, empires have risen to astonishing heights, only to collapse, leaving behind ruins and echoes. The cycle of collapse and renewal is as old as civilization itself, And it reminds us of a sobering truth: no matter how advanced, no matter how powerful, human societies remain fragile, forever vulnerable to forces both within and beyond their control. One of the first recorded collapses came in Mesopotamia, where the great city-states of Sumer flourished for centuries. These were the cradles of writing, law, and monumental architecture, yet they fell into decline when the land that had sustained them turned against them. Overfarming drained the soil while irrigation salted the ground, making once fertile fields barren. The rivers that gave them life also shifted, cutting off water supplies. Environmental change, combined with internal conflict and outside invasions, unraveled what seemed eternal. The lesson was clear: human ambition may shape the land, but the land can just as easily erase human achievement. The Indus Valley civilization offers another haunting example. Its cities, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were marvels of planning, with advanced drainage systems, standardized weights, and a culture that spanned hundreds of miles. Yet within centuries, they too were abandoned. Archaeologists still debate the cause: climate change, shifting rivers, drought, or invasions. But the truth is likely a combination. What's striking is how sudden it was. A civilization that once bustled with trade and culture simply disappeared, leaving behind questions and mysteries. Collapse does not always arrive with a roar. Sometimes it comes quietly, like the slow dimming of a flame. Even mighty Egypt, with its dynasties stretching across millennia, faced moments of collapse. The Old Kingdom, known for the pyramids, fell during a period of famine and political turmoil. The Middle Kingdom rose in its place, only to falter centuries later. Each time, Egypt revived itself, but never quite the same. Collapse did not always mean total extinction. Sometimes it meant transformation, a shedding of old systems and the birth of something new. The pattern is striking. Civilizations rarely vanish without trace. They change, adapt, and in doing so, carry fragments of the old into the new. But perhaps no period illustrates the fragility of civilizations better than the late Bronze Age collapse. This was not the fall of a single empire, but of many interconnected societies. The Mycenaeans in Greece, the Hittites in Anatolia, the powerful kingdoms of the Levant, and even Egypt, though it barely survived. Entire regions were devastated in just a few decades. Trade networks broke down, cities were abandoned, literacy declined, and the world entered what some call a dark age. The reasons remain debated: climate shifts, droughts, invasions by the mysterious sea peoples, internal rebellions, or all of the above. But what stands out is how interconnectedness, once a source of strength, became a weakness. When one society fell, the shock rippled outward, toppling others. Collapse was contagious. Yet, from collapse came renewal. Out of the ashes of the Bronze Age, new powers emerged. The Greeks eventually rose, giving the world philosophy, drama, and democracy. The Phoenicians spread across the Mediterranean, pioneering trade and creating the alphabet that would shape countless languages. The Hebrews developed a faith that would influence billions. Collapse was not the end. It was a turning point, a reset that cleared the stage for new civilizations to rise. The cycle repeated in the Americas. The Mayans built vast cities, their temples piercing the jungle canopy, their calendars tracking time with eerie precision. But by the 9th century, many of these cities were abandoned. Drought, warfare, and overpopulation likely played their roles. Yet the Mayan people never disappeared. They adapted, their descendants still alive today. The ancestral Puebloans of the American Southwest faced a similar fate, abandoning cliff dwellings and villages when drought made survival impossible. Collapse here too meant transformation, not annihilation. Rome, however, remains the most iconic example of collapse. For centuries, the Roman Empire dominated Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its roads, aqueducts, laws, and armies seemed to guarantee eternal rule. Yet by the 5th century, the Western Empire had fallen. Economic strain, political corruption, overexpansion, and invasions by migrating peoples all combined to break the backbone of Rome. But the story did not end there. While Rome fell in the West, it survived in the East as the Byzantine Empire, preserving knowledge and culture for another 1,000 years. And even in the ruins of Rome, new societies emerged, carrying fragments of Roman law, engineering, and culture into the medieval world. What these stories reveal is that collapse is not always destruction, it is change. Civilizations, like living beings, have life cycles. They are born, they grow, they flourish, and eventually they weaken. Sometimes they transform into something new, sometimes they leave behind ruins for future generations to wonder at. But always they remind us of the delicate balance between human ambition and the forces of nature, between stability and chaos. Modern historians and scientists study these collapses, not just to understand the past, but to warn the present. The same factors that toppled ancient societies, climate change, resource depletion, inequality, war, still threaten us today. The soil that sustained Sumer was destroyed by overuse. Today we face deforestation, soil erosion, and desertification on a global scale. The droughts that devastated the Mayans echo in today's shifting climate. The interconnectedness that spread collapse in the Bronze Age resembles our modern global economy, where a crisis in one region can ripple across the planet. History is not distant. It is a mirror, showing us the risks of ignoring the lessons of those who came before. Yet there is hope in renewal. Just as the fall of one civilization often sparked the rise of another, humanity has always found ways to rebuild. Collapse is not destiny, it is a challenge. The question is whether we can break the cycle, whether we can learn enough from the past to build a civilization resilient enough to endure. That is the true lesson of history, that fragility and resilience exist side by side, and the balance between them is what defines our survival. Perhaps this is why ruins fascinate us. When we walk among the crumbled temples of Angkor, the broken statues of Easter Island, or the silent streets of Pompeii, we are reminded not just of loss, but of continuity. These places speak across centuries, telling us that humans have always reached high, and even when they fall, they leave behind legacies that inspire. Collapse is frightening, but it is also a reminder that nothing is truly permanent, and yet nothing is truly lost. In the end, the fragile balance of civilizations reflects the fragile balance of humanity itself. We are builders and destroyers, visionaries and short-sighted opportunists. We rise, we fall, and we rise again. The ruins scattered across the earth are not just warnings, they are proof of resilience, creativity, and the endless capacity to begin anew. And as long as humanity walks this planet, the story of collapse and renewal will remain a central chapter in the larger epic of Earth. When we look at the modern world, with airplanes crisscrossing the skies, ships moving goods across oceans, and the internet binding billions of people together, it feels natural to think that global connection is a recent phenomenon. But the truth is, the seeds of this interconnected world were sown centuries ago, when ambitious empires and daring explorers first pushed the limits of human geography. The age of empires and exploration was not just about conquest or discovery. It was about stitching together continents, cultures, and ideas into a web that would forever change the trajectory of humanity. And while this age brought astonishing progress, it also carried deep shadows of violence, exploitation, and domination, leaving a legacy that still shapes our lives today. Long before Columbus or Magellan set sail, humans were already exploring and expanding. The Mongol Empire, for instance, which stretched across Eurasia in the 13th century, created one of the most remarkable networks of trade and communication in history. Under the rule of Genghis Khan and his descendants, merchants could travel from China to the Mediterranean under the protection of Mongol law. The Silk Road flourished during this time, connecting east and west in ways that had never been possible before. Spices, silk, porcelain, and ideas moved across thousands of miles. With these exchanges came not only wealth, but also knowledge. Gunpowder, paper, and even the compass traveled westward, reshaping societies that had never seen such innovation. But the same routes also carried devastation. The Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, spread along these very pathways, wiping out millions across Europe and Asia. The Mongol era showed the double-edged sword of global connection, prosperity and death riding side by side. The great maritime empires soon took this connection to an entirely new level. Portugal was the first to leap into the unknown. Prince Henry the Navigator sponsored expeditions along the African coast in the 15th century, driven by the promise of gold, spices, and new trade routes. By mastering shipbuilding and navigation, the Portuguese established sea lanes that stretched to India, Southeast Asia, and even China. With them came trade outposts, fortresses, and the beginnings of European global dominance. Spain, not to be outdone, gambled on a bold experiment. In 1492, Christopher Columbus set sail across the Atlantic, not realizing that an entirely new world lay in his path. His voyage shattered the boundaries of the known world, linking Europe with the Americas in a collision that reshaped both hemispheres forever. The so-called discovery of the New World led to the Columbian Exchange, a transfer of crops, animals, people, and diseases that would forever alter the global balance. Potatoes, maize, and tomatoes traveled to Europe, transforming diets and economies, while horses, wheat, and smallpox moved westward, upending indigenous lives. The scale of transformation was breathtaking. Entire continents were suddenly bound together for better and for worse. The age of exploration was not driven purely by curiosity. It was fueled by empire, profit, and the hunger for dominance. Spain carved out vast territories in the Americas, extracting unimaginable wealth in silver and gold from places like Potosi in modern Bolivia. This flow of riches made Spain one of the most powerful nations on earth, but it came at a staggering cost. Indigenous populations were enslaved, massacred, or decimated by disease. Cultures that had flourished for centuries, like the Aztecs and Incas, were violently overturned. The story of global connection is inseparable from the story of conquest, and every port, every galleon carried not just goods but also the scars of exploitation. As Spain and Portugal extended their empires, other European powers joined the race. The Dutch, with their formidable naval fleet, built a trading empire that spanned from Indonesia to the Caribbean. Amsterdam became a hub of global commerce, where spices from Asia mingled with sugar from the Americas. The Dutch East India Company, founded in 1602, was one of the first multinational corporations wielding power that rivaled nations. It could wage war, sign treaties, and govern colonies, all in the pursuit of profit. The idea of corporations shaping the fate of millions born in this age still echoes today. England and France soon entered the stage, establishing their own colonies and trading posts. England's rise as a maritime power transformed the world as it colonized North America, parts of Africa, India, and later, Australia. The British Empire would eventually grow into the largest in history, famously claiming that the sun never set on its domains. But behind that poetic phrase lay darker realities: exploitation of colonies, the suppression of local cultures, and the brutal extraction of resources. India's wealth fueled Britain's industrial revolution, even as famine and oppression ravaged local populations. Global connection was not only about goods and empires, it was also about people, sometimes willingly, often not. The transatlantic slave trade became one of the most horrifying engines of this new global order. Millions of Africans were captured, chained, and shipped across the Atlantic to work in plantations under brutal conditions. Sugar, cotton, and tobacco, harvested through their suffering, fed the wealth of European empires and built the foundation of modern capitalism. The echoes of this forced migration still haunt the world today, shaping demographics, inequitable identities across continents. Yet for all its horrors, the age of empires and exploration also sparked revolutions in thought, science, and culture. Knowledge traveled across oceans just as goods did. Maps became more accurate, astronomy advanced, and a spirit of inquiry pushed humans to challenge old assumptions. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, liberty, and human rights, was fueled in part by the exchanges and discoveries of this era. Global connection gave humanity not only material wealth, but also new ways of thinking about itself. The irony, however, is that while empires sought control, connection often created unintended consequences. The very trade networks that enriched Europe also exposed it to vulnerability. Wars broke out across the globe as nations fought to control colonies. Rebellions rose in the Americas, India, and Africa as colonized peoples demanded freedom. The same currents of connection that spread goods and knowledge also spread revolution, setting the stage for the modern world where empires would eventually crumble and new nations would emerge. By the 19th century, the age of exploration had matured into the age of industrial empires. Steamships, railways, and telegraphs bound the world tighter than ever. The scramble for Africa divided the continent among European powers, while Asia faced the push and pull of foreign influence. But with each expansion came resistance, and the seeds of decolonization were already being planted. Empires seemed eternal, but just like the civilizations before them, they too would eventually face collapse. What makes the story of empires and exploration so captivating is its paradoxical nature. It was an age of brilliance and brutality, of discovery and destruction. It connected the globe in ways that would have seemed unimaginable to earlier societies, creating the blueprint for our modern interconnected world. But it also unleashed forces of inequality, exploitation and conflict that we still wrestle with today. The world we live in, the languages we speak, the foods we eat, the technologies we use, carries the fingerprints of that era. In the end, empires and explorers were not just expanding maps, they were weaving the fabric of a new world, one both wondrous and haunted. The age of exploration showed us the promise and peril of global connection, a dual legacy that continues to shape the human story. And as with all chapters in Earth's history, it leaves us with a haunting question. If empires, with all their power and reach, eventually fall, what of our own global civilization? Are we truly connected in strength, or are we simply more vulnerable than ever before? The story of humanity took an irreversible turn when the first sparks of revolution lit up the 18th century. For thousands of years, the rhythms of life had remained mostly unchanged. People farmed the land, villages grew into cities, kings and emperors rose and fell, but the tools of everyday survival were not so different from those used by generations past. Then, almost suddenly in the grand arc of time, everything accelerated. Revolutions swept through nations, and the birth of industry reshaped the very foundations of power, culture, and survival. This was not just change, it was transformation on a scale so profound that it redefined what it meant to be human in the modern age. The first of these upheavals was political. In 1776, the American colonies defied one of the greatest empires of the era, declaring independence from Britain. It was more than just a rebellion. It was a radical statement that power did not have to belong solely to kings or aristocrats, that ordinary people had a claim to self-rule. Only a few years later, the French Revolution erupted, tearing apart centuries of monarchy and privilege with cries of liberty, equality, fraternity. Heads rolled, palaces burned, and the entire social order of Europe trembled. What terrified monarchs across the continent was the realization that ideas, simple, powerful ideas about human rights and freedom, could topple thrones that had stood for centuries. These revolutions inspired countless others, spreading sparks to Latin America, Haiti, and beyond. The age of kings was slowly giving way to the age of nations. But while political revolutions redrew borders and reimagined societies, another revolution was brewing in the factories, fields, and mines of Europe, the Industrial Revolution. Beginning in Britain in the late 18th century, it transformed human life more dramatically than any political upheaval ever could. For the first time, machines powered by coal and steam began to replace human and animal labor. Where once it might take a weaver days to produce cloth by hand, a mechanized loom could do it in hours. Iron smelters blazed, railroads spread like veins across the land, and factories rose, their chimneys belching smoke that darkened the sky. The impact was staggering. Populations exploded as food production increased, thanks to agricultural innovations like crop rotation and mechanization. Cities grew at a dizzying pace, drawing millions from rural villages into crowded urban centers where life was fast, dirty, and dangerous. For many, the Industrial Revolution meant grueling hours in factories, child labor, and polluted air thick with soot. Disease spread rapidly in cramped conditions, and inequality widened between those who controlled the machines and those who worked them. Yet at the same time, the revolution created unprecedented wealth, expanded economies, and birthed new social classes. For the first time in history, humanity had the power to reshape its environment at will, not slowly over centuries, but within a single lifetime. Technology became the new engine of power. Nations that industrialized surged ahead of those that did not. Britain, with its coal reserves and global empire, dominated trade and industry, earning the title of the workshop of the world. Its railways stretched across continents, its navy controlled the seas, and its factories churned out goods that reshaped global markets. France, Germany, and later the United States followed, igniting a race that turned industrial capacity into military might. Wars would never be the same again. Machines of industry became machines of destruction, from rifles and cannons to ironclad ships and eventually far deadlier weapons. But industry did not just change power structures, it changed ideas. Philosophers, economists, and political thinkers grappled with the new reality. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote of the struggles between the working class and the owners of capital, predicting revolutions that would overthrow industrial capitalism. Adam Smith's ideas of free markets and competition became the foundation of modern economics. Meanwhile, scientists pushed boundaries. Darwin challenged humanity's place in the natural order with his theory of evolution, while inventors like Edison and Tesla harnessed electricity to light up the world and connect it with wires carrying messages at the speed of thought. For the first time, humanity was not simply living within nature's limits. It was actively rewriting them. The revolutions of this age were not confined to factories and parliaments. They touched every aspect of life. In America, the abolitionist movement rose to challenge the horror of slavery, culminating in the Civil War and the eventual emancipation of millions. Women began to demand rights long denied to them, organizing for suffrage and equality. The rise of literacy, fueled by cheap print and newspapers, gave ordinary people access to knowledge that had once been the privilege of the elite. The human mind itself seemed to expand, daring to imagine futures that had once been impossible. Yet, with progress came peril. The industrial appetite for resources devoured landscapes, forests were cut down, rivers were poisoned, and air was thick with smoke. Workers toiled in brutal conditions, fueling the profits of factory owners while living in poverty. Children, some no older than 6, labored in mines and mills, their small bodies better suited for crawling into tight, dangerous spaces. Epidemics swept through overcrowded cities, and crime soared as inequality deepened. The very engine of progress was also a machine of suffering, and many wondered whether the cost was too high. Global connection, too, deepened in this era. Industrialized nations used their power to expand empires, claiming territories across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Colonies provided raw materials for factories and markets for finished goods. The British Raj in India, for instance, fed Britain's textile industry with cotton, while draining the subcontinent of wealth. The scramble for Africa carved up an entire continent in a few decades, drawing borders that ignored cultures and histories, with consequences that still echo today. This was the darker side of industrial progress: conquest, exploitation, and domination on a global scale. Still, the momentum of change could not be stopped. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, electricity replaced steam as the symbol of modernity. Cities glittered with electric lights, telephones connected voices across distances, and early automobiles roared to life on crowded streets. The world was shrinking, moving faster, and demanding more. The revolutions of politics, industry, and ideas had converged to create a new world order, where empires rose not just on land and armies, but on factories, machines, and the relentless drive to innovate. The birth of modern power was both exhilarating and terrifying. Never before had humans wielded so much control over their environment and each other. The revolutions of this age promised freedom, equality, and progress. But they also unleashed inequality, exploitation, and conflict on a scale never seen before. This duality, the light and shadow of revolution, would define the centuries to come. And as humanity stood at the dawn of the 20th century, one thing was clear: the world had changed forever. There was no turning back to the old rhythms of farming villages and feudal kings. The revolutions had birthed the modern age, with all its wonders and horrors. The question was not whether humanity could wield this new power, but whether it could survive it. The 20th century announced itself not with whispers but with thunder, and the first great storm came in 1914. For centuries, wars had been fought with swords, muskets, and cannons, battles contained to regions and kingdoms. But now, with the power of industry harnessed to destruction, humanity faced something altogether different: war on a scale the world had never seen. World War I was called the war to end all wars, not because of its peace, but because it revealed how fragile civilization truly was when ambition, nationalism, and machinery collided. The spark was deceptively small: the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. A single gunshot rippled outward, igniting alliances that dragged entire empires into battle. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, France, and Britain, soon joined by the Ottoman Empire and later the United States, transformed Europe into a battlefield that swallowed millions of lives. Trenches carved into the earth became symbols of the stalemate. Soldiers crouched in mud and filth, waiting for orders to charge into storms of machine gun fire. Gas clouds rolled across no man's land, searing lungs and eyes, while artillery shells shook the ground with endless thunder. This was war, mechanized, industrialized, and stripped of any illusion of glory. The scale of loss was staggering. By the time the armistice was signed in 1918, more than 16 million lives were gone. Empires collapsed in the aftermath. The Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, and the Russian empires fell apart, while Germany was forced into humiliating defeat under the Treaty of Versailles. But the peace was fragile, built not on reconciliation but on resentment. Borders were redrawn, colonies divided, and debts imposed, sowing seeds of bitterness that would soon erupt again. The war to end all wars was, in truth, only the beginning of a darker chapter. The interwar years seemed at first to promise recovery. Jazz filled the air, technology raced forward with radios, automobiles, and airplanes, and societies experimented with new freedoms. But beneath the glamour of the Roaring Twenties lurked instability. The Great Depression of 1929 shattered economies worldwide, leaving millions jobless and desperate. In Germany, humiliation from Versailles mixed with economic ruin, creating fertile ground for extremism. And in that void, a new storm gathered. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose with promises of revival and vengeance, while in Italy, Mussolini's fascists preached empire. In Japan, militarists pushed for expansion across Asia. The world was sliding toward another conflict, one far deadlier than the last. World War II erupted in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Within weeks, Europe was engulfed, but unlike the trenches of World War I, this war was fought with speed, fire, and terror. Blitzkrieg tactics sent tanks racing across landscapes, supported by bombers raining destruction from the skies. Civilians were no longer bystanders, but targets. London burned during the Blitz. Entire cities in Europe and Asia were leveled, and millions of innocents were caught in the crossfire. The Holocaust revealed the darkest depths of human cruelty, as the Nazi regime orchestrated the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews, alongside millions of others deemed undesirable. It was not just war, it was genocide, industrialized death carried out with chilling efficiency. The war spanned continents. In the Pacific, Japan's empire expanded with brutal ferocity until the United States entered after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. The battles that followed, Midway, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, were fought across islands, seas, and skies, with unimaginable bloodshed. In Europe, the tide turned slowly. The Soviet Union, after suffering catastrophic losses, pushed back at Stalingrad, beginning a relentless drive westward. The Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy in 1944, opening the path to liberate Europe. And in 1945, with Berlin reduced to rubble and Hitler dead in his bunker, the war in Europe ended. But in Asia, the conflict concluded with an act that changed history forever: the atomic bomb. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, obliterating cities in moments and killing hundreds of thousands instantly or through radiation that lingered long after. For the first time, humanity had created a weapon capable of ending civilization itself. World War II closed not with a peace treaty alone, but with the dawning of a terrifying new reality. Humans now possessed the power to annihilate their own species. The devastation of the 2 world wars was beyond comprehension. Between them, they claimed more than 70 million lives, shattered economies, and scarred landscapes. But they also reshaped the global order. Old empires crumbled. Britain and France emerged weakened, while colonies around the world seized the moment to demand independence. The United States and the Soviet Union, once distant powers, now stood as superpowers, locked in a new kind of conflict: the Cold War. The balance of power had shifted, and the age of global upheaval was far from over. The wars also unleashed massive social change. Women who had stepped into factories and workplaces during the wars refused to return quietly to the margins, fueling movements for equality. Civil rights struggles gained momentum, as marginalized groups who had fought on the front lines demanded justice at home. The horrors of the Holocaust pushed the world to confront the meaning of human rights, leading to the creation of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Out of destruction came a fragile hope. Perhaps humanity could learn, perhaps a new world order could prevent another descent into chaos. And yet, the world wars revealed something unsettling about humanity. For all our progress in science, technology, and philosophy, we remained capable of destruction on a scale that defied imagination. Civilization could crumble not just from natural disasters or plagues, but from our own hands, driven by greed, pride, and hatred. The 20th century forced humanity to stare into the abyss it had created, to recognize that survival was not guaranteed. The global upheaval of the world wars was not just about nations or battles, it was about the human condition itself. We had unlocked power we could barely control, and the cost was written in the ruins of cities, the silence of lost generations, and the shadows of mushroom clouds that still haunt the skies. The wars ended, but their legacy remains etched into our lives, in the alliances we build, the fears we harbour, and the fragile peace we struggle to preserve. The world wars were not simply chapters in history books. They were warnings. They showed us that civilization is not indestructible, that progress is not inevitable, and that humanity, for all its brilliance, can just as easily engineer its own destruction. The question that lingered after 1945 and still lingers today is whether we have truly learned, or whether the same currents that dragged us into global catastrophe once before will rise again. When the guns of World War II finally fell silent in 1945, the world sighed in relief. Cities lay in ruins, millions of lives had been lost, and humanity had glimpsed the terrifying power of nuclear weapons. But peace was not the gift that followed. Instead, the end of one war marked the beginning of another, an invisible war fought not on battlefields, but in the shadows of politics, ideology and fear. It was called the Cold War, but make no mistake, it was not cold at all. It was a global contest that threatened at any moment to ignite into nuclear fire, a standoff that kept billions of people living under the constant spectre of annihilation. The Cold War was not about territory alone. It was about two competing visions of the future. On one side stood the United States and its allies, champions of capitalism and democracy, promising prosperity through free markets and individual liberty. On the other side stood the Soviet Union, armed with communism, promising equality, collective strength, and a workers' paradise. Both systems claimed to be the true path for humanity, and both saw the other not just as a rival, but as a threat that had to be contained or destroyed. The result was a world divided by ideology, with nearly every nation forced to choose a side or risk being crushed between the two giants. At the heart of the Cold War was the nuclear bomb. The United States had demonstrated its apocalyptic potential in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but by 1949 the Soviet Union had its own bomb. The arms race began in earnest. Hydrogen bombs, far more powerful than the originals, were built. Missiles capable of traveling across continents were developed. Submarines carrying nuclear warheads prowled the oceans, invisible and unstoppable. Soon, both sides had enough firepower to destroy not just each other but the entire planet many times over. The doctrine that emerged was chillingly simple: mutually assured Dritogen, or MAD. The idea was that if either side launched an attack, the other would retaliate with equal or greater force, guaranteeing total annihilation. It was a balance built not on trust, but on terror. And so the Cold War became a strange kind of stalemate. The superpowers could not afford open war, so they fought in the shadows through spies, propaganda, proxy wars, and technological competition. The Iron Curtain fell across Europe, splitting the continent in two. In the West, NATO was formed as a military alliance led by the United States. In the East, the Warsaw Pact emerged under Soviet control. Berlin became the symbol of this division, a city literally split in half, with a wall dividing freedom from oppression, or so each side claimed. Families were separated overnight, barbed wire and guard towers rising as concrete proof of a divided world. But while Europe froze under the standoff, the Cold War flared violently elsewhere. In Korea, North and South became pawns in the struggle, their war in the 1950s leaving millions dead and a border that still stands today as one of the most dangerous places on Earth. In Vietnam, the United States poured blood and resources into stopping the spread of communism, only to be met with fierce resistance and eventual defeat. Across Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East, coups, revolutions, and insurgencies were fueled by superpower money and weapons. The Cold War was global, not because of nuclear arsenals alone, but because it infected nearly every corner of the world. Beyond warfare, the competition extended into space. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, the world gasped. For the first time, humanity had placed a satellite in orbit. The space race was on. The Soviets sent the first man, Yuri Gagarin, into space, but the United States struck back with the Apollo program, landing men on the moon in 19... These were not just scientific milestones, they were symbols of power, proof of which system could push humanity further. And while these achievements inspired wonder, they also carried darker undertones. The same rockets that carried astronauts into space could also deliver nuclear warheads across oceans. The Cold War was defined as much by psychology as by politics. People lived under constant fear. Sirens blared in drills as children hid under desks, practicing for a nuclear strike that would almost certainly kill them anyway. Families built fallout shelters in their backyards, stocked with canned goods, as if a few feet of concrete could protect them from the firestorm of atomic war. Movies, books, and television reflected the paranoia, imagining futures where humanity had destroyed itself. The mushroom cloud became the era's ultimate symbol, both a warning and a nightmare. There were moments when the Cold War nearly turned hot, moments when the world stood on the brink of destruction. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was one of the closest. The Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from American shores. For 13 tense days, the world held its breath as American ships blockaded the island and military forces prepared for war. One wrong move could have ended civilization. Finally, a deal was struck. The Soviets withdrew their missiles, and the US secretly agreed to remove its own from Turkey. The crisis ended, but the lesson was terrifying. The world had come within a hair's breadth of nuclear war, and it could happen again at any moment. Yet the Cold War was not only about fear, it also reshaped culture, science, and daily life. Propaganda became a weapon, with each side portraying itself as the defender of freedom and the other as the enemy of humanity. Films, art, music, and literature carried the marks of ideological struggle. The Olympics turned into battlegrounds of national pride, athletes competing not just for medals, but for proof of their system's superiority. Even technology outside of warfare, computers, satellites, medicine advanced rapidly under the pressure of competition. Humanity, in trying to outdo itself, made leaps that might otherwise have taken centuries. But the Cold War also bred resistance. Citizens in Eastern Europe grew weary of Soviet control, whispering of freedom and rebellion. Dissidents risked their lives to challenge the regimes. In the West, protests erupted against nuclear weapons, with millions marching for disarmament. By the 1980s, cracks began to appear in the once solid wall of division. Economic stagnation weakened the Soviet Union, while reformers like Mikhail Gorbachev tried to change the system with policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika restructuring. But instead of saving the Soviet Empire, these reforms accelerated its collapse. In 1989, the unthinkable happened. The Berlin Wall fell, piece by piece, as citizens tore it down with their own hands. The image of East and West Germans embracing, climbing the wall that had divided them for decades, became the symbol of a new era. Within 2 years, the Soviet Union itself dissolved, and the Cold War came to an end. The United States stood as the sole superpower, victorious in the ideological struggle. And yet, the Cold War left a haunting legacy. The nuclear weapons were never unbuilt. They still exist, thousands of them, hidden in silos and submarines, waiting. The fear that defined the age never fully disappeared. It merely shifted. The Cold War had taught humanity that survival was fragile, that civilization could end not through natural disaster, but through human decision. It gave us space travel, technological wonders, and moments of triumph, but it also left scars of paranoia, mistrust, and the knowledge that we had walked to the edge of extinction, and might again. The Cold War was not just a conflict between two superpowers, it was a test of humanity's capacity to live under the shadow of annihilation, to create progress while balancing on the edge of destruction. It forced us to confront a question that still lingers today. With the power to destroy ourselves in our hands, can we ever truly trust ourselves not to use it? The world changed the moment humans learned to harness fire, but it changed again, perhaps even more radically, when we learned to harness information. If the Industrial Revolution turned coal and steam into power, the digital revolution turned knowledge into the most valuable resource of all. Beginning in the mid-20th century and exploding into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, this revolution transformed every corner of human life. How we work, how we communicate, how we love, how we wage war, and even how we think about ourselves. It connected billions of people into a global network that transcended borders, cultures, and languages, creating a level of interdependence the world had never seen before. But as with every revolution in history, the digital age came with its shadows, new vulnerabilities, new inequalities, and new dangers that humanity still struggles to understand. The first sparks of the digital revolution began quietly, in laboratories and universities. The invention of the transistor in 1947 replaced bulky vacuum tubes, shrinking computers from room-sized behemoths into machines that could eventually sit on a desk. By the 1960s and 70s, mainframes were powering corporations and government agencies, while ARPANET, a project funded by the US Department of Defense, connected computers across distances in ways that seemed almost magical at the time. Few realized it then, but ARPANET was the seed of something far bigger, the Internet. At first, the Internet was a tool for scientists and researchers, a way to share data and communicate. But as networks grew, as protocols like TCP/IP standardized communication, the system expanded. In 1989, Tim Berners-Lee proposed the World Wide Web, creating a platform that allowed anyone with a computer and a connection to publish and access information with unprecedented ease. Suddenly, the world was not just local, it was global. Within a decade, the Internet went from a niche tool to a household necessity, altering the fabric of daily life. The rise of personal computers fueled this transformation. Companies like Apple, IBM, and later Microsoft made machines accessible to ordinary people, no longer just governments or corporations. With a keyboard and a screen, individuals could now create, calculate, and communicate in ways unimaginable only a generation before. The workplace was digitized, letters gave way to emails, libraries to search engines, and face-to-face conversations to instant messages. Humanity was moving faster, sharing more, and becoming more connected than ever before. And then came the real acceleration: mobile technology. The smartphone, popularized in the 2000s, took the power of a computer and placed it in the palm of a hand. No longer were people tethered to desks or bulky devices. With a touchscreen and an internet connection, anyone could access knowledge, entertainment, and social interaction anywhere, anytime. Billions of people who had never touched a computer suddenly leapt directly into the digital world through phones. This leap was revolutionary not just for wealthy nations, but for developing ones, where smartphones became the primary gateway to the internet, bypassing the desktop era entirely. The impact of this was staggering. Entire industries were upended almost overnight. Music shifted from vinyl and CDs to digital downloads and then to streaming platforms. Movies and television, once bound to theaters and broadcast schedules, migrated to on-demand services. Retail stores struggled against the rise of e-commerce giants like Amazon and Alibaba, who brought the world's marketplace to people's doorsteps. Even money itself began to dematerialize, with digital banking, credit systems, and eventually cryptocurrency challenging traditional finance. The digital revolution wasn't just about new technology, it was about reimagining the fundamental systems of human life. Globalization was both a driver and a result of this transformation. Goods, services, and information moved across borders at lightning speed. A designer in New York could collaborate with a programmer in Bangalore, while a small business in Kenya could sell products to customers in Tokyo. Supply chains stretched across continents, weaving nations together into a single economic system. This interconnection fueled prosperity, lifting millions out of poverty, especially in places like China and India, where industrial and digital booms created middle classes on a scale never seen before. But it also deepened inequalities, as those with access to technology surged ahead while those without were left behind. The so-called digital divide became one of the defining challenges of the era. Yet the digital revolution was not just about economics. It reshaped identity and culture. Social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram turned billions of people into publishers, broadcasters, and influencers. Information no longer flowed from a few powerful media outlets. It was created, shared, and consumed by ordinary people, often in real time. Revolutions were live tweeted, disasters live streamed, and personal stories went viral across continents. The power of narrative shifted dramatically. An individual with a smartphone could reach more people in a single post than entire governments once could, through newspapers or television. The world was suddenly louder, more chaotic, but also more democratic in its flow of information. But as the power of digital connection grew, so too did its risks. The same networks that spread truth also spread lies, misinformation, and propaganda at unprecedented speeds. Fake news, manipulated videos, and coordinated disinformation campaigns became weapons in political battles. Privacy eroded as corporations and governments collected oceans of data on individuals, tracking movements, preferences, and even thoughts through algorithms. Cybercrime surged, with hackers breaching banks, hospitals, and even national governments. The digital world, once hailed as a utopia of connection, revealed its darker side, a battleground without borders, where control of information meant control of reality itself. The global nature of this revolution also meant that crises in one part of the world could ripple instantly to others. A financial collapse in the US in 2008 triggered a global recession. A virus outbreak in China in 2019 spread across the world in weeks, but this time the story was told in real time through online dashboards, news feeds, and social media. The pandemic revealed both the power and the peril of globalization. Vaccines and knowledge spread faster than ever, but so did fear, conspiracy theories, and misinformation. The same tools that connected us also magnified our vulnerability. And yet, despite the dangers, the digital revolution also unlocked wonders. Medical advances accelerated with shared data and supercomputing. Artificial intelligence began to mimic human learning, promising breakthroughs in science, medicine, and communication. Space exploration was revitalized by private companies fueled by digital technologies. Even our sense of community evolved, as people built digital tribes across geography, finding belonging in places where physical connection was impossible. For better or worse, humanity had woven itself into a single digital web, and there was no turning back. What makes the digital revolution so remarkable is that it is still unfolding. Unlike the Industrial Revolution, whose smokestacks and railroads are now historical relics, the digital world evolves daily, faster than most of us can keep up with. The devices we carry are more powerful than the computers that guided astronauts to the moon, yet we use them to scroll through cat videos and memes. The irony is not lost, but it also shows how deeply this technology is integrated into the fabric of ordinary life. Globalization, powered by digital tools, has created opportunities but also tensions. Nations wrestle with questions of sovereignty in a world where data flows freely across borders. Workers fear automation and job loss, as machines and algorithms take over tasks once reserved for humans. Cultures blend, clash, and transform under the pressure of global media, where a song in Korea or a video in Brazil can become a worldwide phenomenon overnight. The world has become one village, but in that closeness lies friction, as differences are exposed and amplified. The digital revolution is the latest chapter in humanity's story of transformation. It has given us power, connection, and knowledge beyond anything our ancestors could have dreamed of. But it has also given us new anxieties about truth, about control, about what it means to be human in a world where machines grow smarter every day, just like every revolution before it. This one carries both promise and peril. The question is not whether it will reshape our future. It already has. But whether we can shape it wisely, or whether we will be consumed by the very systems we created. The Earth has always been a place of change. Ice ages swept across continents, volcanoes reshaped landscapes, and meteors brought devastation followed by rebirth. But never before has one species, our species, become such a dominant force in shaping the fate of the planet. Today we stand at a turning point, one that may determine not just the future of humanity, but the very stability of the Earth's. Climate change is not a distant threat. It is here now, unfolding with every passing year. Rising seas, shifting storms, disappearing ice, vanishing species. These are not random natural cycles. They are the fingerprints of human activity written across the planet. And the most unsettling part is that the story is still being written, with no certainty of how it ends. When scientists first began warning about carbon dioxide building up in the atmosphere in the mid-20th century, few paid attention. The Earth was vast and human industry seemed small in comparison. But over decades, evidence mounted. Smokestacks, cars, deforestation, and endless consumption were pumping greenhouse gases into the sky, trapping heat like a blanket around the planet. What was once theoretical has now become undeniable reality. The last decade has been the hottest in recorded history. Arctic ice that stood for millennia is retreating at terrifying speed. Coral reefs, once thriving with life and color, are bleaching into ghostly graveyards. Extreme weather events, from record-breaking hurricanes to catastrophic wildfires, no longer feel like anomalies. They feel like the new normal. But here's the shocking truth. Climate change is not just about the environment. It is about power, wealth, survival, and the future of civilization itself. Rising seas threaten to drown entire nations, forcing millions, perhaps hundreds of millions, into migration. Crops fail under droughts and heat waves, sparking food shortages and conflicts over resources. Diseases spread more easily in a warmer, unstable climate. Economies collapse when infrastructure built for yesterday's world can no longer withstand today's storms. The Earth is sending a clear message: adapt or perish. And yet, the paradox of this crisis is that the solutions are within our reach. Renewable energy, solar, wind, geothermal, has become cheaper and more powerful than ever before. Cities are experimenting with green designs, electric vehicles are reshaping transportation, and some countries are racing toward carbon neutrality. But progress is uneven, fragile, and often undermined by politics, profit, and denial. While scientists sound the alarm, industries continue to drill, burn, and consume at unsustainable levels. Humanity knows what must be done, but the question is, do we have the will to do it before the tipping points arrive? The Earth's climate system contains thresholds, points of no return. If enough ice melts, seas will rise uncontrollably. If the Amazon rainforest collapses, it will release more carbon than it absorbs, turning from Earth's lungs into its poison. If permafrost thaws, it will unleash vast stores of methane, accelerating warming beyond anything we can control. These are not distant science fiction scenarios. They are very real possibilities unfolding within the lifetime of children alive today. Each year of inaction narrows the path forward. Each delay locks in consequences that will echo for centuries. But this is not just a story of doom. History shows that humanity often rises in moments of crisis. Just as we once tamed fire, built cities, and crossed oceans, we now face a test unlike any other. Can we build a future that is sustainable, resilient, and just? The fight against climate change is not only about avoiding disaster, it is about reimagining the kind of world we want to live in. A world powered by clean energy, where cities breathe with green spaces, where innovation drives prosperity without destroying the planet. A world where humanity finally understands that survival is not about conquering nature, but living in balance with it. The future of Earth's climate is also tied to technology. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and space exploration are tools that could either save us or push us closer to collapse. AI can help us predict weather, optimize energy systems, and discover breakthroughs in science, but it can also consume massive energy and amplify inequalities if misused. Biotechnology could create crops that survive heat and drought, but also risks unknown consequences when tampering with life. And space exploration, often seen as humanity's escape plan, raises its own questions. Should we look to colonize other planets while failing to protect our own? Or should space be a mirror that reminds us how fragile and irreplaceable Earth truly is? And then comes the most haunting question of all. What if Earth is not fighting for us, but against us? Some scientists argue that the planet itself has self-regulating systems, feedback loops that keep conditions stable for life. But push those systems too far, and they fight back. Rising seas, stronger storms, collapsing ecosystems, they are not just symptoms, they are Earth's way of resetting balance, even if it means sweeping humanity aside. After all, the planet has endured extinctions before. Dinosaurs ruled for millions of years, only to be erased in a single catastrophic event. Why would humanity be immune? Still, humanity has something no other species has ever had: foresight. We can see the danger before it fully arrives. We can measure the gases in the air, track the melting ice, and model the future decades in advance. We are not blind. The question is whether we are wise enough to act on that knowledge. Will future generations look back at us as the people who saved the Earth, or as the ones who knew the danger and did nothing? The next century will decide that the choices we make now about energy, consumption, equality, and responsibility will ripple far beyond our own lifetimes. If we fail, Earth will endure, but humanity may not. If we succeed, we may unlock a golden era where technology and nature coexist, where our species thrives without destroying the home that made us. It is the greatest challenge in human history, but also the greatest opportunity. And perhaps that's the ultimate twist in Earth's story. For billions of years it has shaped us through fire, ice, and catastrophe. Now, for the first time, we shape it. We hold the pen, writing the next chapter in the planet's epic. The ending has not yet been decided. It could be collapse and chaos, or it could be renewal and survival. The choice lies not in the stars, but in us. And so, after billions of years of chaos, creation, and transformation, we find ourselves standing on the edge of Earth's story, both witnesses and authors of its future. The ground beneath us carries the memory of continents colliding, oceans rising and vanishing, and life struggling against odds that seemed insurmountable. The skies above us hold the remnants of ancient starlight, the same cosmic dust that gave birth to our planet, and ultimately to us. But here, in this fleeting moment of time, humanity has become something no other species has managed to achieve: the planet's storyteller, its shaper, and potentially its undoing. Think about it. Earth has endured everything the universe has thrown at it. Asteroids large enough to wipe out nearly all life, volcanic eruptions that turned skies black for years, ice ages that froze oceans solid. Each time the planet reset itself, shedding old life and paving the way for something new. Yet the challenge it now faces is different, because for the first time the threat comes not from outer space or natural catastrophe, but from the very beings it nurtured into existence. Humanity, with all its brilliance and ambition, has become the greatest test Earth has ever known. But here lies the paradox. While we are capable of destruction, we are equally capable of preservation. Never before has a species had the tools, the knowledge, and the foresight to change the trajectory of a planet. We have satellites orbiting overhead, monitoring every breath of the atmosphere. We have the science to transition from fossil fuels to renewables, the imagination to build cities that coexist with nature, and the vision to restore ecosystems long thought lost. What happens next depends on whether we choose to wield that power for survival or for ruin. The story of Earth, then, is not just a record of its past, but a mirror reflecting our choices. Will future generations inherit a world scarred beyond repair, its seas swallowing cities, its forests reduced to memory, its climate hostile and unpredictable, or will they inherit a thriving planet, one where humanity has finally learned to live in balance with the very forces that shaped it? The answer is not written in stone. It is written in the decisions we make each day, in the energy we use, the leaders we follow, the values we uphold, and the legacy we leave behind. What makes this conclusion haunting is that the planet does not need us to survive. We need it. If humanity fails, Earth will go on. The continents will shift, the oceans will rise and fall, and new forms of life will emerge in our absence. In the grand timeline of billions of years, we are but a brief flicker, and yet, within that flicker lies infinite possibility. We can choose to burn out quickly, consumed by our own short-sightedness, or we can choose to extend that light, guiding not just ourselves but the planet into a future worth imagining. So maybe the real story isn't about Earth at all, it's about us, about whether we have the courage to rise above our instincts, the wisdom to listen to the warnings written in the ice, the seas and the skies, and the humility to realize that we are not masters of this world, but its stewards. The Earth has given us everything: food, shelter, beauty, inspiration. Now it asks for something in return: respect, responsibility, and the will to protect it. The ending of this story has not yet been written. It could be a tale of collapse, a cautionary legend told by whatever species comes after us, or it could be a story of redemption, where humanity turned from the brink and built a future worthy of the gift it had been given. The question is simple, yet profound. What kind of chapter will we write in the book of Earth? The answer will not only define our place in history, but also decide whether the light of our species flickers out or burns bright for generations to come.